Aloha and welcome to Island Connections. I'm Ibrahim Aoude, Holy Land Realities. And we have two guests with us in the studio. Robert Stiver, thank you for coming. And you're a producer of Holy Land Peace that plays on Olelo.
Olelo, yes.
Channel 40, 54,
54,
and then 49
some
sometimes,
49,
right,
yes.
yeah. And then Ramsis Lutfy, co-producer of the same show, Holy Land Peace.
Yes,
Thank you for coming, both.
Yeah, thank
Yeah,
you for asking us.
You're welcome. And what we want to talk about is what's happening in the Palestinian area and the Holy Land and also in the region. But first we would want to start with your issue, which is the program Holy Land Peace. And how did you come about to figure out what to do and to start the program? Probably Robert first.
Yes, Ibrahim. It was perhaps a year and a half ago when we had an unfortunate interaction with Public Broadcasting Hawaii, PBS Hawaii, which to our mind unaccountably refused to air a program that we thought was very fair and reasonable about the Holy Land situation. So Ramsis and I entered into many interactions and comments and dialogues, and we found that we could become producers and cameramen and produce our own shows on Olelo Public Access TV. So we went through a lot of training. We've identified a lot of sources of getting DVD material for us, and we have aired literally hundreds and hundreds of hours of programming on Olelo in the last 18 months.
Okay, and on channel 54, 49, and sometimes on
Once
other
in a while
channels.
53, but generally
Yeah.
54 with a spillover to 49.
Right. And Ramsis, what made you, beyond what Robert was saying, what made you be interested in
Actually,
this?
Ibrahim, we got interested in this business for a few years before that because we realized that the small groups we belonged to, we were always preaching for the choir. So when we decided to try and give the American public an idea about what's happening, we realized that lots of Americans don't realize what's happening actually, because the media, the corporate media, were only showing one side of the thing, and that's the Israeli side. So we decided to go into this, and as Bob said, we tried with PBS, and we got nowhere. So we went into Olelo and went through some training, and eventually, after getting that training, we managed to get our own program.
Yeah, but you know, you talk about in a democratic society, the public needs to be informed, and information means looking at things from all aspects, all sides, and so forth, and not just one particular point of view, which is Zionist Israeli point of view. But that would be the mark of an educated public that is having a lot of ideas and a lot of points of views on a particular issue, so that they become a more informed citizenry that can deal with the rights and the responsibilities of a democratic society and so on. Yeah, so go ahead.
Sorry, I'm just wanting here to mention something about the role Olelo is playing. It's a fantastic outlet for views of the whole public, which is essential for democratic society, as you said. So we are playing a sort of vital role in uprising and educating the people about what's going on, and a wide spectrum. This is the even-handedness that is required of a popular outlet and public access television station.
Yeah, in fact, that's why they call it public access.
That's
so
right.
you have like a variety
Yeah.
of ideas and points of view and so on. Robert, okay, where do you get those materials that you show on your particular programs?
Well, we started out with a man named Fred Shepard, who is coordinating with public access televisions across the country. And he has complimented Ramsis and me for being very, advanced in doing what we're doing. But we received an initial supply of DVDs via Fred, and later we have come to know alternatefocus.org, which has programs that can be seen online on your computer. And we have the Media Education Foundation, which is back on the East Coast. They're also online. And we have a source called Palestine Online Store, from which we've received at least a couple of DVDs. So we have found during our process that there are a wealth of sources from which we can tap, and we get permission from them to air our programs on Olelo. So there is a wealth of information out there, and we're taking advantage of it.
Yeah. So, like, what are some of the issues that you are dealing with on your show? For instance, we have a few segments from DVDs that you play that we will show them here, but I just want, before doing so, to ask, like, what kind of issues you are talking about on your particular show, as examples, for instance, and why do you do so?
Actually, it's the problem of Palestine has many facets and aspects, and we sometimes, for the educational sort of point of view, we try to put the history of the thing, and we have several of the DVDs that we show showing the history of the problem, how it arose over the years from the 19th century into the 20th century, and of course the war of 1948 and so on, and then the 67 war, and how Israel occupied the Palestinian territories, which were given to the Palestinians, albeit in a very harsh way, by the United Nations. And then in 67 war, how the Israelis took that over, and in an attempt which is still going on every day and every night and every year, in and out, to bring to fruition their scheme of greater Israel.
Yeah, like one of the things, Robert, along those lines is that not only are the Israelis occupying the West Bank at this point, and earlier Gaza, but even in Gaza they have incursions continually, and kill a lot of innocent people in Gaza. But also in terms of the West Bank, they keep taking more and more land, confiscating more and more land from the Palestinian farmers and villagers and people in the town, sometimes like cutting the town in half or taking part of the town and so forth into their particular area through the scheme of the wall. They have a wall, they call it a fence. But could you say something about that particular issue as regards to the wall before we show a video on that?
Yes, of course. The wall is still being constructed feverishly, but when it is completed, it's reportedly to be about 750 kilometers, close to 500 miles. And it has, for example, completely surrounded the town of Qalqilia. There's only one entrance in and out of the town. It's strangulated the whole town. Bethlehem has become essentially the same thing. Bethlehem, the birthplace of Jesus Christ and of Christianity, has become a walled-in enclave. And this apartheid wall is not a barrier or a fence. It is an offense, offense to the people of Palestine. The Christians of Palestine are equally affected by the wall. People cannot go now from Bethlehem to Jerusalem to celebrate
Easter,
Easter, for
instance,
example.
yeah. Mhm.
There are processes to get passes and so forth that are just impossible to get now. So the wall is, the apartheid wall is separating farmers from their homes, students from their classrooms and their homes. And I just read the other day, perhaps yesterday, that the wall is credited in certain circles with almost having shut down suicide bombings. Well, the fact is that Intifada II was just so draining on the Palestinians as well as the Israelis that Intifada II basically shut down about a year ago. So it was the exhaustion of that process that has created some sort of calm, not the apartheid wall. Anybody who wants to get around the apartheid wall could go around a part that's not yet completed if he or she wanted to. So that's a red herring, as many red herrings are thrown around in the Holy Land.
Yeah. So why don't we now watch about 5.5 minutes of DVD on the Wall of Hate, Wall of Shame, to give our viewers an idea about what it is that the Palestinians have been enduring under occupation and some of the stuff that you are showing on your show. So we will watch that and then we will discuss.
Compared to the 96-mile, 11.8 feet high Berlin Wall that was destroyed in 1989, the Israel Separation Wall extends more than 408 miles and reaches between 6 and 24 feet high. It consists of solid concrete in some areas and a 40-meter complex of trenches 6 to 8 feet deep, barbed wires, electronic surveillance fences, and patrol roads in other areas. The wall, which swallows more than 42% of the West Bank, is in most areas not on or near the 1967 Green Line that divides Palestine from Israel. It snakes its path as deep as 10 miles inside the West Bank and encircles cities like Tulkarm and Qalqilia entirely, thus trapping all in its path and separating Palestinians from their families, homes, land, water, and livelihoods. Numerous villages have already been confiscated, 200,000 people separated, 35,000 meters of irrigation networks seized, 11,400 dunams of agricultural lands confiscated, and 100,000 ancient olive trees destroyed, thus impacting life, agriculture, freedom of movement, water usage, and income. By the time the wall is completed, the numbers will triple. The Ramallah district has been totally separated from nearby Jerusalem. It has been sliced from multiple directions. Massive land grab in most fertile areas and expulsion from areas around Ramallah city have occurred. More than 22 villages have been affected and entire communities have been imprisoned. In nearby Budris, the wall has engulfed most of its fertile land, separating farmers from their agricultural fields and leaving more people with refugee status. As if occupation is not enough to inflict hardship on Palestinians, the whole population now lives in ghettos with freedom of movement restricted to those who possess hard-to-obtain passes from the occupying power. Several neighborhoods have been entirely cut off, and farmers now require permits to go to their fields. Intimidation by Israeli soldiers and settlers is becoming a daily reality for everybody, and a simple trip to school or hospital is becoming a risky adventure and ordeal. Immediately after its occupation of the West Bank and Gaza Strip in 1967, Israel took control of all water resources and prohibited Palestinians from water development and drilling the required infrastructure. To date, not a single permit issued for agriculture or domestic use in Palestinian areas has been granted. In addition to its undeclared agenda of confiscating more land and forcing people to become refugees for the third time, the separation wall aims at isolating more natural water wells owned by Palestinians. More than 31 natural water wells producing 3.8 million cubic meters that serve thousands of Palestinians for agricultural and domestic use have been confiscated. While the annual rainfall accumulation in the region is 47.8% in Palestine, 29.7% in Israel, 22.5% in Jordan. Israel's domestic water use per capita reaches more than 52%, leaving 30% for Jordan and 18% for Palestine. The hardest hit communities are Qalqilya, Tulkarm, and Jenin. In 1948, Qalqilya, the second largest accessible water resource in the region after the Jordan River, lost 80% of its land to Israel and 70% of its residents became refugees. Today, with 34 natural water wells, Qalqilya district is losing 50% of the remaining 20% of its water-rich land to Israel, leaving 36 towns confiscated and 90,000 residents unemployed. With the construction of the wall, Israel's policy of home demolition has intensified. The wall devours everything in its path, including agricultural fields and olive groves, as well as inhabited homes. Since its occupation of the West Bank and Gaza Strip in 1967, Israel has demolished more than 10,000 Palestinian homes as collective punishment, and now the number is dramatically increasing. More Palestinian homes will be demolished to leave room for the wall, and Palestinians are required to foot the bill. The gains for Israel, however, are tremendous. Israel now gained more land for agriculture, land for settlement expansion, total control of all water resources, a direct link to the Jordan Valley slicing through the West Bank, and most importantly, an end of a viable Palestinian state.
So that's really powerful because you have propaganda and then you have facts on the ground in terms of land grab, confiscation, water resources, 100,000 olive trees, just destroyed, house demolition, not only to build a wall, but also just as collective punishment against Palestinians who are demonstrating or throwing stones or doing, protests against occupation and so on. So the propaganda says that it is against terrorism and against terrorists, and yet the policy, you can see it like is a planned thing, to really wipe out Palestinian society and its institutions and so on, and not allow a Palestinian state to take, root in Palestinian society. So, any more on that?
Well, it's obvious that the Palestinian people are really heroic in their resistance to this kind of oppression and tyrannical treatment. I don't think we have seen in the recent sort of history a nation or a people that have suffered so much and still are standing their grounds and not giving in to what the Israelis are doing to them. This what the Israelis say about the wall is all lies, because it's a land grab project by which they are taking half of the 22 meager and horrible portion that were left to the Palestinians after the Israelis attacked and controlled the whole of Palestine except those 22%.
Yeah, 22% of entire Palestine is the
entire
West Bank and Gaza,
Yeah.
and then of that they are having a lot of land grab and
Yeah.
building colonies. They call them settlements,
Yeah.
euphemism, but these colonies are there to support more colonists, Israeli colonists. And this way they can take more land, like, the larger, greater Israel kind of thing. Any more on that, Bob?
Well, everything you gentlemen are saying is correct. Israel appears determined to deny the Palestinians even a very small portion of their traditional homeland. And what we see truly is a total regimentation of the Palestinian people, from having to have permits to go anywhere, to restrictions on travel, checkpoints, this wall. The Palestinians are just being herded sadistically by Israel. And as Ramsis said, the perseverance that they show on both Christians and Muslims is astounding, truly. I salute the Palestinian people. I wish for peace and justice for every Jew, Christian, and Muslim in the Holy Land. But Israel, I call Israel militant Zionist Israel, seems determined not to abide by any concept of peace with justice.
Yeah. However, I give you an example. Jimmy Carter wrote Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid. And, we all read the book, and to me, it is innocuous. It's just stating what's really going on in the West Bank, in the occupied, Palestinian-occupied territories. And he's not touching Israel proper in terms of its treatment of its own Arab citizens, etc. And yet you see this whole onslaught trying to discredit Jimmy Carter, previous president of the United States, for saying what he himself witnessed in the occupied territories, and his center, the Carter Center, has been engaged in those kinds of issues. Any more on that, Bob?
Well, of course, here's President Carter's book, and he certainly has been there a number of times. He has supervised internationally sanctioned elections in the Palestinian territory. So Jimmy Carter knows what's going on there. And it's typical Zionist strategy to immediately attack and demonize anyone who dares to question their machinations in the Holy Land. Jimmy Carter, of course, restricted his book to the occupied Palestinian territories, where apartheid is a fact of life every moment of every day. But that is certainly not the end of it either, because there are documented instances and facts of the same sort of apartheid that carries on in Israel proper. And we know of one book written by a Jewish lady named Susan Nathan, The Other Side of Israel, which I believe is a must-read for any U.S. citizen who wants to know what's going on inside Israel proper. And she documents with terrible clarity the fact that Palestinian Arabs, citizens of the State of Israel, are discriminated against as second or third class citizens within Israel. So it's a shame that Jimmy Carter was and is being demonized for what he wrote, but he wrote only the truth and only a part of the truth at that.
Yeah, right. Any more on that? Yeah.
Well, what I was going to say, what Bob has just mentioned, and it is really ridiculous when you hear Israel saying about itself that it's the only democracy in the Middle East. And this is an oxymoron, because the only Jewish democratic state. And how can you put a Jewish word Jewish with democratic? You have about 20% of the citizens of Israel as Arabs, and they are not mentioned in the name of the country, even. So how can you say that we are a democratic country while we are a Jewish state, and we have a minority of Arabs that are being trodden down and being prevented from even building any homes for their children around them? There is no way that they can expand, while the Jews of Israel are given complete run of the land and allowed to build more to accommodate their families and so on. So it's an oxymoron to say that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, because the question of how can you, again, have 20% of the population not counted because they are not Jewish,
Yeah.
and then you call yourself a
Yeah,
democracy.
yeah.
It's rather like
Yeah.
ridiculous, as you mentioned. And then let me say one more thing about that, is that from 1948 till 1966, the Arab, the Palestinians inside Israel proper, borders of 1967, had been subjected to military rule until 1966, from 1948 to 1966. They needed permits to move from one place to another, etc. And a lot of land of theirs inside Israel proper had been confiscated because the Israelis would, if you, for instance, have land in Nazareth, but you are working in Jaffa, they won't give you a permit to go back to Nazareth to claim your land, and then they pass a law saying that if you're not there by a date certain, then you have forfeited your land. I mean, here it is, I mean, it's really a theft, legal theft, so to speak, legal in quotes, of course. But we can talk more about that later on, but we want to continue on with the question of the occupied territories and deal with that particular issue. So I want to play another segment of the same DVD, Wall of Hate, Wall of Shame, that you show all of it, in fact, on your program, to give the viewers an idea about how one economist, for instance, from University in California, San Diego, I think, is talking about the meaning of the wall and the meaning of those kinds of policies that Israelis have been perpetrating against the Palestinian citizens of the West Bank, which is unoccupied territory. So we'll watch that and then we have more discussion.
The settlers themselves tended to be divided into two groups. There about a third that are ideological settlers, that is, they see settlement as redeeming the land for Israel, for the Jewish people. And then there are two-thirds of the settlers who are coming for economic reasons, that is, they are responding to incentives provided by the Israeli government in terms of cheap utility hookups, better school facilities, housing subsidies, and so forth. And these economic incentives were estimated by the World Bank to run at about $1 billion a year.
With nearly 250,000 settlers already in place, the Israeli government has created an entrenched voting bloc of citizens. And with each denium of land that is confiscated by settlers, Israel achieves a new bargaining position from which to negotiate the fate of the remaining Palestinian territories. In effect, the settlements make it possible for the Israeli government to say to the world, "We cannot go backward and dismantle our settlements. They are hard facts and must be accepted as such, even as we build more each day." Stationed outside the town of Jayus, Steve Floor of ISM explains the meaning of the wall to Palestinians.
I've been in Jayus for the past about 5 days, and our main responsibility there has been gate watch. And let me give you a little explanation on what gate watch actually is. Jayus is a small town of about 2,800 people. Approximately 75 to 80% are farmers. And now what's happened is the Israeli government has erected a huge barrier known as the apartheid wall that has severed the Jayus community and separated these farmers from their land. In the process of their colonial expansion, the Israeli government has confiscated the Jayus land, approximately 13,000 dunams, and is now de facto been annexed to Israel. And now the farmers don't have access to their own land they lived on and relied on for their subsistence for generations and generations. So now about 3 times a day, Israeli troops in Jeeps and Hummers come by, and they open the fence to give farmers access from one side to the other side. And the farmers there with the donkeys, their tractors, waiting for these 17 and 18-year-old boys and girls to come by, to give them access to the land that they've owned. And you can't even believe it. You can't even fathom the humiliation that these farmers have to go through on a daily basis. Sometimes we sit there at the gate and we have to wait 2-3 hours for the soldiers to show up. Meanwhile, there's one family with children that have to get to the other side of the fence so the kids go to school. But every day the kids are late because the soldiers don't care. They don't show up on time. It's really miserable, and words can't really describe it. So we were there for about 5 days, talking with families and meeting them and hearing about the suffering. And it is suffering in every way. It's suffering, and it's really hard.
Yeah, this gives us a flavor of what's happening on a daily basis in the occupied territories and Israeli practices, which is basically collective punishment, which is illegal under international law. But I'm not sure where Mr. Floor is from in terms of organization, but there are a number of organizations who go there to watch Israeli practices against the Palestinian people. And one of them is the Christian Peacemakers team. So not all Christians are, in the United States are pro-Zionist, and not all Christians are Christian Zionists, so to speak. But also there is the International Solidarity Movement, the ISM, goes there. And then there are others like Rabbis for Peace and even organizations, Israeli organizations, B'Tselem, the humanitarian organization, and so on.
Women in Black.
So Women in Black and so forth. So there are like a lot of Israelis who see these practices against Palestinian population and try to do something in support of the Palestinians, in solidarity with the Palestinians against their own government practices and policies. Yeah. Any more on that?
I would like to say a few words about, the phenomenon, the whole thing. If you watch the whole actions that Israel is practicing in the occupied territories, you can realize the scheme, the militant Zionist scheme, to take the land without the people on it. Mm-hmm. They want to void the land from the people by getting the Palestinians to feel that life is not possible anymore. Mm-hmm. So they pack and go. Mm-hmm. And this is what has been sort of mentioned several times, facts on the ground. Mm-hmm. That's what the Israelis keep telling the American administration every time they come and meet. Facts on the ground will not allow us to change and withdraw from the occupied territories at the moment. Mm-hmm. So these are the facts on the ground, but the facts on the ground tomorrow are going to be different from what they are today. Right. And today they were completely and hugely different from what they were in 48 and 67 and so on. Yeah. So they are enforcing their scheme, that which is Greater Israel, Eretz Israel, and voiding the land from its proper and lawful owners.
Yeah. We have a caller on the line, Cheryl from Kauai.
Aloha.
Yeah, aloha.
Oh, I wasn't aware that this was really live, but I have a question.
Sure.
I am Hawaiian, and I really wanted some truth about the feelings or the thoughts of religious leaders regarding the overthrow of 1893 of the Kingdom of Hawaii.
Yeah. You're talking about the 1893 overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And what religious leaders are saying about that?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Which religious leaders, like in Hawaii or?
Overall. Your opinion about the overthrow and its illegalities. And
okay. Okay, I mean, you don't have to be religious to be against the act of the overthrow and the robbing of the Hawaiian Kanaka Maoli of their land, right? I mean, you don't have to be religious about that. It's just a matter of justice and equality and so on.
And I would also think that, you know, the matter of principle too, yeah?
Absolutely, yeah. And in fact, I tell you, like, you know, for Palestinians, when they hear about, you know, what has happened in Hawaii historically and what's happening still, they are in complete support and solidarity with the Kanaka Maoli, you know, because they know what it means to have land and be robbed of that land, and the Palestinians have been robbed of that land on a continuous basis, not continual, but continuous basis. So they are in support and in solidarity with the Kanaka Maoli in terms of those kinds of land rights and self-determination and so on, because people who are not, you know, do not have self-determination, are robbed from their self-determination, can understand the other kinds of issues that are criminal and inhumane and unjust that other people are going through, including Kanaka Maoli.
Yeah, I'm of fifth generation, and you know, I hate to say the word genocide, but you know, it has really, you know, desecrated our culture,
Right,
our
absolutely.
land, and our water.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I thank you for your.
Yeah, mahalo nui loa.
Aloha.
Aloha. Yeah, so I mean, any more on that, Bob?
Well, I was grateful for that caller because there is a direct connection between the Hawaiian people who consider themselves occupied and the Palestinian people who are occupied. There is a great empathy, as you said, Ibrahim, and I think certainly people in Hawaii should pick up very quickly and closely on the terrible tragedy that is befalling the Palestinians every day.
Yeah. So that's an interesting thing, but you know, a lot of propaganda again, and the whole discourse about, you know, Israel being a democracy and protecting themselves from terrorism, and they are fighting for their survival. All these things actually have been debunked by the facts on the ground that's happening to the Palestinians, one, but also by Israeli writers, authors, Israeli citizens who have really came against that kind of myth about the myth of creation of Israel, etc. And one of them is Ilan Pappé. I mean, you have read, you know, his book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. And he has another article in 2006 Palestinian Journal of Palestine Studies called the 1948 Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. So any more on that kind of issue?
Well, as I mentioned to you in an earlier conversation, I depend mainly on sources written by not only Jews, but Israelis, actual Israelis, that have been witnessing what's happening there for generations now. And they have seen what the number of Israelis was before the Second World, the end of the Second World War, and that there was only a minority, a small minority of Jews there, and then they built up by sort of the British Empire allowing them to immigrate to Israel, and then of course by the time the Second World War ended, they came in droves.
Yeah, right.
And using the Holocaust as the sort of pretext for which they can come to Israel.
Yeah, I mean, the Holocaust, you know, is a horrible, has been a horrible thing and so on, but doesn't mean that you, you know, confiscate other people's land because of some kind of historic myth that, you know, it was the land of Israel and so forth. I mean, historically, it's not supported at all. But we have, do we have a caller? Denny, you're on the air.
Yes, how are you tonight?
Fine, thanks.
My question to you is why do the taxpayers of the United States Constitution have to give the Israelis 20 to 25 billion dollars a year for their whatever their cause may be, and they do not provide anything to the economy of the United States or the world.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for the question. We'll have our viewers, our guests respond to that one. He mentioned, Denny, like 25 billion a year or something, but it's not that. It's much less than that, yeah. Ramsis, you want to?
Well, since 1967, and even before that, the United States of America have been giving the Israeli state about $3 billion a year. And of course, apart from this, they are getting lots of other money from the United States in the loan guarantees, which make them able to take money and invest it in the United States, different financial organizations and houses. And so they are getting a lot of money from the United States. And plus, there's also aid in billions of dollars of armaments. The Israeli army is the fourth strongest in the world, and Israel has a stockpile of more than 200 nuclear bombs. So it's the strongest. And of course, the United States, I don't know, what can I say, corporate America, is depending on Israel as its frontline sort of castle or fort for the American interests or the American hegemony of the Middle East, because they wanted to control the Middle East, and they wanted to guarantee that the national movements in the Middle East, the Arab countries of the Middle East, are suppressed all the time.
Yeah.
And Israel is playing that role.
Yeah. And, our viewer's point is well taken in the sense, okay, what do the American people gain from this?
Yeah.
Despite the fact that a lot of Christian Zionists in the United States think that, Israel has the right to be there, and they're looking for the end of the world, end of time, and the Armageddon kind of mythology, etc., to give justification for their support of Israel, despite the fact that the Palestinians have been suffering and so on. You're a Christian and a Christian fundamentalist at that. Would you go with that notion that other Christian fundamentalists have as vis-a-vis Israel, and why not if not?
Ibrahim, I'm not sure I'd call myself a Christian fundamentalist.
Okay.
I am a Jesus Christ red letter Christian, and I believe in the deepest part of my heart that what is going on in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories today would elicit strong cries of hypocrites from Jesus, just as he called the Pharisees hypocrites 2,000 years ago. I think Christian Zionism is a bizarre form of Christianity. I would not even call it Christianity. But this leads me to a position that I have come to find in myself over 43 years of suffering with the Palestinians and studying and observing what is going on in the world. But I'd like to make the point that fundamentalism in any one of the three Abrahamic faiths is anathema to God. Whether you are a Jewish fundamentalist, which I call a militant Zionist, and Zionism, of course, began back in the 1880s or so, but whether you're a Jewish fundamentalist, a militant Zionist, or whether you're a Christian fundamentalist, typically a Christian Zionist these days, or there are Islamic fundamentalists, they are all deviants from the Word of God and the hope of God for His children.
Okay, I stand corrected, but I know about your deep faith and so on. because like Carter is also like Christian fundamentalist,
Yes.
but he doesn't support those kinds
Exactly.
of
Exactly.
myths that the other guys have on that. I want to show another clip from the DVD about the right of return to give our viewers an idea about what does that mean, this right of return and so on. So we'll watch that and we'll discuss.
In the wake of the massive exodus of Palestinians from Israel, the UN General Assembly passed Resolution 194 in December of 1948, establishing the right of return for refugees. The U.S. was one of the 35 countries voting for it. Resolution 194 resolves that the refugees wishing to return to their homes and live in peace with their neighbors should be permitted to do so at the earliest practicable date, and that compensation should be paid for the property of those choosing not to return, and for the loss of or damage to property which, under principles of international law or inequity, should be made good by the governments or authorities responsible.
Israel does not agree to give any compensation for any refugee. It's a principal question for Israel. It was a principal question in the negotiations. Israel does not accept the principle of compensation, of course not the principle of return. You know, the principle of return is a demographic issue. It's totally rejected by Israel, although you know, it was drafted by the United States, the right of return. And many people forget it, but it was a resolution suggested by the United States 194 and the United Nations. Anyway, Israel rejects the right of return and the compensation because the notion of compensation means that Israel accepts the responsibility.
From the outset, Israel did not acknowledge responsibility for the refugees. In 1949, Mr. Ibrahim told the UN that the problem of the Arab refugees was a direct consequence of the war launched by the Arab states, which were entirely responsible for that, as well as for other forms of suffering inflicted by that war, and that it was wrong to describe the refugees as having been driven out. Rather, they had fled in an atmosphere of fear, insecurity, and danger inseparable from war. Nevertheless, as a condition for its membership in the UN, Israel announced its acceptance of obligations to make compensation for abandoned lands, and gave a tentative acceptance of Resolution 194 by declaring that Israel did not exclude the possibility of a measure of repatriation. During more than 50 years since the resolution was passed, no Palestinian refugee has ever been repatriated.
Yeah, I mean, here this propaganda by Israel and Abu Eban, one of their most illustrious foreign policy experts, this kind of myth has been debunked by researchers like Ilan Pape and others, Avi Shleim and so on. And even like Israeli Arabs, like Noor Masalha, etc., have talked about that and debunked this kind of myth, etc. But before we go to that, we have a caller on the line, Kanani from Hilo. You're on the air, Kanani.
Hi, I wanted to ask if you're saying Israel today was...
Could you speak up a little bit, please? I can't hear you.
Yeah, Israel today was Palestine prior to 1948 when Israel was occupied.
Yes.
Where was the original Israel as prior to 1948? It was Palestine.
There was no Israel. There were some Jews, some people say like 5,000, maximum 30,000 Jews who have lived in that area called geographic Palestine. But these guys were Arab. They were not like from Poland and Austria and the rest of, or Russia and so forth. These are Arab Jews, like, there are Christian Arabs, there are Jewish Arabs, and there are Muslim Arabs, But Zionism as an ideology came and corrupted this whole thing and created that kind of division. In the old days, of course, there was like the kingdom of Israel and Judah, but these did not have the entire area of what is called geographic Palestine, never, and never were they there for any longer than 70 years, while there were before and after people who were from the what we now call the Arabian Peninsula, just like Jews came from the Arabian Peninsula, the Hebrews, the old Hebrews actually. came from there. So there's a whole history to that, you know, beyond the propaganda and beyond the mythology that's created by the Zionist movement and the Zionist organizations. And they do not accept anything of what we say, but what we have is historic investigation on our side in trying to debunk their mythology and propaganda that they perpetrate against the American people who do not know about those kinds of issues because they have other things to deal with. For instance, in Hawaii, Kanaka Maoli have other things to deal with, like, you know, trying to fight for their own self-determination and so forth. But thank you for your call. Mahalo. We still have a few moments here. And I just wanted to say that if you have any other things to say about the right of return and about Kanani's question as well, you know.
Actually, it's another one of the great injustices that are happening in the Holy Land, which is that any Jew in the world is considered an Israeli, and he's given his trip to Israel is paid. The easiest thing for a Jew in Australia or New Zealand or in England or anywhere in the world to tell the Israelis that I want to come home. He has never seen the place in his life, neither had his sort of parents seen the place, generations and generations, and he immediately is given a ticket to Israel, and he's considered a returning to Israel. While the lawful inhabitants of that land, the indigenous people that have been living there for generations and thousands of years, and were driven by the Israeli hordes or you know, the Haganah in 1948 out of Palestine,
the armed forces,
into the camps, the refugee camps in Jordan and in Syria and in Lebanon, cannot come back to their own homes. I was teaching, many of my students were Palestinians, and they would tell me, I wanted to go and just have a look at my parents' house. And they wouldn't allow him, even a trip to have a look at nostalgia. Is not allowed. Although the right of return was guaranteed by the United Nations and, of course, under the sort of auspices of the United States. Okay.
Right. I mean, you know, this is very interesting because, I mean, we're not talking about like kicking out 50 people or whatever. We're talking about 750,000 people at least. 750,000, and then those became refugees, and then from there it was just a miserable existence as regards to self-determination and so on. But what I want to do, we have some time left. I want to show another segment from a DVD called Off the Charts by Alison Weir, is that? Yeah. And it's interesting to show how, torture is being perpetrated against the Palestinians. And here we're talking about like people who are, innocent civilians, children, and so forth. So we'll watch that and then we'll talk more about it.
During this intifada, more or less any given time, certainly in the last year, over 330 children in prison. And also not in the prisons that you would expect at home, not in the nice kind of child-friendly centres which, fulfill every international standard on juvenile justice and everything. But the treatment and the maltreatment that the kids go through is unbelievable.
The interrogation center is very difficult. They used the torture, the physical torture and psychological more for the children. No family visits, no lawyer visits until he confess. And then they send the children to the detention center. The detention center it is in the Israeli camp or in settlements. And there the situation is very difficult. They put every 10 children in a small room, 3 meters to 3 meters square. In the same bed, sometimes 2 or 3 children together. And they have to spend all the time in this room. Only they can leave the room for once a week for the 15 minutes, at the end, half hour to see the sun.
There don't need to be any charges. There doesn't need to be any particular reason, it seems, that children can just be arrested because someone's heard their name. We know of one case in which a child was arrested because he happened to be wearing a T-shirt similar to someone who was seen at a clash. And this was it.
We would call it a kangaroo court because there isn't even an opportunity for the defendant to have his lawyer speak to him before or discuss the case or know in advance what the charges are or present facts in evidence before the court.
During the first
So, I mean, this segment speaks for itself in terms of the inhumanity that the oppressor and the occupier is perpetrating against the Palestinian people. Yeah, and we still have like a couple of minutes, and that we can like discuss a bit more on that. Robert?
Well, of course, the prisoners are an aspect of collective punishment. There are 10,000 Palestinian prisoners, including some 36 duly elected Palestinian legislators who are languishing in Israeli jails. But I think, gentlemen, we've been circling around the point here that militant Zionist Israel is in flagrant violation of international law. Dozens of UN Security Council resolutions that have demanded that they vacate the occupied territories, that they treat the Palestinians humanely. Israel is just truly an international outlaw, and until the regime in Tel Aviv is taught or becomes made aware that it is an outlaw, Israel will never be accepted in the Middle East and in the larger world.
Yeah. But the other thing is that, you know, the United States is in full support of Israel.
Yes,
and
yes.
without that,
Yeah.
you know, it is impossible for Israel to continue with its kind of flagrant violation of international
Not only
law.
the United States, the Western world are standing with Israel in whatever it does.
Yeah.
Somebody, what is the Western civilization, about? What is democracy then?
Yeah.
What's all this talk about democracy? And is it sort of supporting the flagrant sort of tyranny that is showing against the
Right. I mean, this is a rich topic that deserves more discussion, in fact. And we are virtually out of time, in fact. So we will have to stop there. Thank you for coming, and thanks for our viewers and for the people who called us. Mahalo nui loa. See you next month.